So I just jumped and had the 9-string made, and I was like, I'll figure it out, because your body doesn't know the difference. There's nothing natural about playing the violin in this weird position, and yet it's one of the most classical instrument, pun intended. And, your body is going to adapt to anything that you put it through, basically. So I knew that if I'd spend the time, I could figure out the instrument and play it. And I was 22 back then, and that mentality kind of followed me, and just like learn the instrument. Your body doesn't know the difference. We're not born to play any instrument, but we can learn all of them. So it's just, treat it as an instrument and you'll figure it out. I was super into the mechanics of the Chapman stick back then. So I kind of wanted to blend these worlds, Chapman stick and electric bass. And, that's how it came about.
Hey, what's up, Vox and Hops heads? I'm Matt, the vocalist of Cryptopsy and the host of the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast, brought to you by Sound Talent Media and Evergreen Podcasts, where I sit down with fellow metal musicians, talk all about their lives and music while sharing killer craft beers. We've all been having a killer week. I most certainly have been. Are you in a band? Would you like to have your band's music showcased on a Vox and Hops episode? I would love to do that for you. I have a whole new segment called Artist Spotlight, where I shine some light on killer bands. Hit me up, send me an email, matt@voxandhops.com, and I will get you sorted on the Artist Spotlight. If you want to have your band's music played on an upcoming episode, send me an email, matt@voxandhops.com. Now, before we jump into today's episode, I'd just like to ask you to follow the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast on the podcast platform of your choice. But more than that, I would love for you to tell a friend about the podcast. If there's someone in your life that really likes experimental music, well, you should definitely let them know that the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast exists. You could tell them that there are over 400 episodes where I sit down with some of the world's best metal musicians who talk all about their lives and music while sharing killer craft beers. If you would encourage one of your experimental music-loving friends to become a brand new Vox and Hops head, that would be something that I would truly appreciate. Now, today on the podcast, I'm very stoked to be with Frédéric Filiatro, also known as ChaotH from Vvon Dogma. Get ready, everyone. This is Vox and Hops episode number 414.
I warn you, what you are about to hear is very disturbing indeed.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Today I'm with Frédéric Filiatro, also known as ChaotH from Vvon Dogma. Fred, I've known you forever. We did horrible things on 70,000 tons of metal. The original one, the real boat that actually weighs 70,000 tons of metal, which we won't talk about tonight, because we're here to talk about something else. I've been meaning to have you on the podcast for many years. I was very stoked when John Asher hit me up to have you on, because you're dropping a full-length album for Vvon Dogma tomorrow, which is super cool. I love talking to artists when it's this close. We're talking about the Cult of Glitch. Fred, how you doing?
I am great. Man, thanks for having me. It's been a while since kind of wanted to do this, so it's really awesome for you to even consider having me, and yes, I'm excited.
The 9-string bass master, 4 wasn't enough, 5 wasn't enough, 6 wasn't enough, you had to go to 9. We're going to hit that later, but this is Vox and Hops, and we're recording this at a Thirsty Thursday live interview. I do these the first Thursday of the month. I hang out with my metal friends, do a Vox and Hops episode with the Thirsty Thursday gang in attendance. Always stoked to do this. Let's just dig straight into it. This is Vox and Hops, where I hang out with my metal friends. We talk about life and metal while sharing a craft beer. Now, over the past few years, you messaged me and you mentioned that you are now sober. So what are you going to be drinking tonight? We'll dig into your newfound sobriety in the future of the episode, but let's just dig into what you're drinking right now.
Yeah, I love this brand, Vagabond, and they just released a couple of 0.5 or less than 0.5, basically alcohol-free, and this one is the white. It's called Salut Au Soleil, and I've had it a couple times before, this week, actually, and I love it.
Very cool. Cheers to you for that. Vagabond is a part of Le Collectif, I believe it's called. It's a huge regroupment of many microbreweries that all brew together in Boucherville, I want to say. There's Vagabond, there's Lemon-Ginger. Loop is also made there. Loop makes beer. They make kombucha. It's a really massive brewery. And very funny story is that the beer that I'm going to drink right now with you today was canned on the old Le Collectif's canning machine. So I have a special beer here today, something very, very close to my heart, something that I love very much, that I'm happy that Drew keeps doing. I'm talking about Kahnawake Brewing and Cryptopsy's Crisptopsy. He does it, 2-3 times a year at this point. It's a modern Pilsner, dry hop Pilsner with Mosaic hops. I love it to death. 4.8%. New World Pilsner is how he calls it, with that brand new reimagined Whisper Supremacy bat from Filip Ivanovic. Just so damn cool. Same canning machine as a collective. It's a small world. I'm going to crack this and take me to your journey of now being sober and what went on there.
I guess the pandemic happened and I got some little health problem in there, so it was the perfect kind of excuse, if you will, or opportunity to quit drinking, because I've been a heavy drinker for like most of the 20 last year, and I was taking breaks, for 2 weeks there, 1 month there, 2 months there, and I figured that, me having a health problem was like the perfect cue for stopping for real, or at least for an extended period. And it's been almost 3 years and I still haven't picked it up, but I still drink beer, with that delicious Salut Au Soleil. So I still drink beer, but I'm discovering all of the 0% and the alcohol-free beer. So, it's still good. It does 70% of the job.
It's a cleaner job, that's for sure. And our life tends to be cleaner when we lean towards the non-alcoholic choices or the 0.5 choices.
Yeah, well, the mornings are easier. That being said, I look at your beer and I'm like, I wish I could have that right now. So it's still there,
Kahnawake Brewing does do some really cool non-alcoholic stuff, but we could hypothetically talk about dragging this into his non-alcoholic line. We'd have to find a clever pun. For Pilsner Supremacy with no alcohol. That's a Christian Donaldson.
You got me started there. I'm gonna find one before the end of this episode.
That would be very cool. Take me to your first beer. Do you remember the very first beer you had? You mentioned that 20 years of your life was spent enjoying beer. So what was your very first beer? Do you remember the first beer you ever had, Fred?
That I ever had? That was probably one of the Molson. I mean, nothing fancy, but I mean, we're both about 40 years old, so I'm guessing that, craft beer wasn't really a thing, or not remotely as popular back in the late 90s is when I started drinking, so it was really all about Molson and Labatt. So back then, there was one really popular that was Molson High Dry, and we would drink a ton of that. I don't know if it's the first one I had, but probably Molson Dry or Molson Export or Molson High Dry, which was our favorite because it was stronger. So yeah, it
was all about effectiveness, and cost effectiveness was very important. In the late 90s, early 2000s, since we're the same age, basically, it was like, how much money do I have? How much can I get this going as far as it can go? So Molson and the high ABVs, those horrible 40 ounces, they're the 10%, and for some reason they made these just brutally, and they tasted like garbage.
But we didn't know. We didn't have any frame of reference, and that's the money we had. And also, you're discovering your own body. You don't know what you can take, what you can't take, so you just drink 10 of those and create memories for life. So,
which I'm happy that there was no social media at that point too.
Yeah.
To document,
we had to
the wonderful memories that we have.
Yeah, you couldn't flip through your phone the next day to figure out. You had to empty your pocket, call friends, gather clues, like what happened. So that was the real detective stuff.
I love that. I'd love to hear about the soundtrack of your youth when you're growing up in your parents' or guardians' house. What music was playing when you were not in control of the radio? What music did your parents or guardians listen to?
I don't know. I guess me being the person that I am musically really was an answer to that. Basically, it was just the popular stuff and radio stuff. My mother had all the popular Quebec artists and the Céline Dion and Whitney Houston, all the big, Whitney Houston's not from Quebec, but, all the mainstream pop. But I remember my first record that I actually recognized was in the 80s. Yeah, I'm that old. And it was Michael Jackson's Bad. And I remember these 2 or 3 or 4 early songs. Me and my brother would run in circle in the basement because we were stimulated by that pop funk, and that's the first music that I actually recognized. But it was the 80s and Michael Jackson was everywhere, so I guess that's normal. But then I discovered rock and roll around 96, and everything changed.
Take me to your first shows. Remember the first show that you went to go see?
Yeah, the first concert that I went to see was on, what's the big venue that closed on Saint Denis?
The Medley.
Yes, the Medley. That's the one. And it was Lagwagon. I think it was back in 97. And it was, because I was 15 years old, and it was like a huge mosh pit, and punk rock mosh pit are pretty big, and it was like a sold out medley, so it was brutal. But that was my first concert. Yes. At
what point did you start getting into playing music, and was it always the bass first?
Well, it started with fiddling around with like an acoustic guitar that my friend had in the basement, and we all started figuring out like the power chord that we'd hear all over the place, and just playing guitar. But one of my friends bought an electric guitar in 97, 98, all around the same time. And we just stopped smoking weed, so we needed to have a new hobby, right? So I bought a bass, or I got a bass as a gift from my parents on my birthday to answer and to play with my friend that newly had an electric guitar. So that really started the whole thing. I became obsessed with the instrument, electric bass. But it was the 90s musical landscape at the time, so it was, punk rock and alternative music and that kind of stuff. And then new metal hit, and, the rest is history, but yeah.
So no more weed, and then you guys became addicted to music and playing music. That's interesting. Typically, it would be like, I start playing music, and then I get into the bad influence of what comes with playing music. That's interesting.
Oh, that still came later. Yeah.
But the bonding with your friend of both of you quitting weed led you to become a musician.
Kind of, yeah. When you discover weed, then you discover about a year later the paranoid phase or something like that, or one of us or two of us in the group, like, we got caught by our parents, and it was like that big family drama. So we're like, we got to cut back, man. Like at 15 or 16 years old, like looking back, we were kids. But then, it kind of, I'm not saying that it was the reason, but the hobby of playing bass like started about the same time that we stopped smoking weed, when I was like 16 years old. So yeah, that's what happened. And I guess I focused a lot of energy on that because, I became obsessed with the instrument, and I've been playing it ever since.
You definitely mastered the 4 strings very quickly, I imagine, which led to all the other strings. I'm not there yet. Take me to your first time on stage. Do you remember your first show?
Yeah, I remember my first show. There was no stage, so I don't remember my first stage. But it was in the inside court of secondaire, of a high school, basically, and we would play for the kids on their lunch break, basically. But like, we had no, they didn't check what we were doing, so we were basically playing cover with my first cover band, Dharma Bombs. That was back in 98, because I started playing in a band like immediately after playing bass. They were like, they need a bass player. I've been playing for 3 or 4 months back then.
That was enough, yeah.
And that was enough to play, the 90s landscape of musicality, basically. So we'd play like, Green Day and Marilyn Manson and Radiohead and Bush and, all the 90s alternative, basically. That was my first show.
Take me to Unexpect hit off. It was so popular. People, as soon as I announced that you were going to be here tonight, a big thread was just going on of people that were so excited because of the Unexpect notoriety, the fact that you were a part of Unexpect. It really took off big. You were part of that Quebec landscape of the 2000s that was happening with Beneath the Massacre, Despised Icon, Unexpect. It's just The Agonist, another example of the wide tapestry of music that comes from Montreal.
That was a fascinating period in music, Montreal in the 2000s and weird metal, specifically. I think we were fortunate enough to, live in that specific era of musical evolution, I feel.
I don't know where it stems from. I get asked this question all the time, and I wasn't planning on asking it, but now as I was naming all this stuff, I want to ask the question, where do you think it came from? I get asked this question all the time, and I have my answer for it. Cryptopsy was already successful before this boom of what happened in the 2000s of the deathcore, the Beyond Creation, which is also super progressive, you guys being probably the closest thing to an extreme metal Mr. Bungle, hypothetically, before Igor. Lots of ties going on there. Where did it come from? Why Montreal? Why Quebec? In your opinion?
I don't know. I guess everybody's talking about how Quebec specifically is kind of a weird blend of American culture, European culture, and Scandinavian culture, because there's that vibe in Montreal, and in that, or at least at that time, like it really is a blend, or it's kind of in the middle of everything, but it's a little European, it's a little American, and all of that. And musically, I think it was answering to that. And maybe because it's cold in Canada, or I don't know, or everything's complicated with life, we try to push the music further, or try to impress with, more musicality, or I don't really know where it came from. But for sure, the 2000s were a fascinating period, because the style, the metal style, was still being developed. There was still subgenre being born left and right. Like you mentioned, there was no really a deathcore before Despised Icon, and
I stand by that. Fuck all the other people that say that someone else started. It started with Despised Icon.
Absolutely, or at least they coined the term, the term, but. And there was not really tech debt before Cryptopsy. That's a big part of it. It pushed death metal forward. And Iron Dissonance is a band that, one of the very first band that pushed like dissonant, like mathcore. And for Unexpect, we helped coin the term avant-garde metal, whatever that meant. But at least there was still a subgenre of music being born. And that's why it's fascinating. Metal was still being explored and invented, literally. Today you have a good deathcore band, you get a good symphonic metal band, but there's no more new subgenre popping out. And that was a really fascinating era of music. So I don't know why it happened, but I'm fortunate to have been part of it, basically.
Absolutely. You guys paved across. You guys toured relentlessly.
Yeah,
put it all out there.
That's for sure.
I'm going to ask the 9-string question now. Why 9 strings? And it feels like excessive to me, but I don't play the bass, right? A lot of people start with 4 and then end up with a 5-string because they want that lower low note. Where did it come from? The necessity to have more strings and a very sore back, I imagine.
Yes. Very sore back when you try to blend the Dillinger Escape Plan Theatrics with the 9-string bass, which I've done for like many years. But I started with 4-string like everybody, but I can't believe how fast things happened back then. But I started playing bass in 98, and within about a year and a half, I had discovered Victor Wooten. I had discovered Jean Baudin, and that's the player that got me into the 9-string bass. Jean Baudin was the bass player for a band called Nuclear Rabbit, which was a Californian weird kind of Mr. Bungle, Primus-ish, hardcore, weird prog band, and I was super into that. When I was 17, a year into playing, I was like super into it, and he was the first one who used a 9-string. One of the very first one, if not the first one, to use a 9-string bass in a rock setup. Because back then, just like craft beer, luthier didn't start being independent and like building a bunch of weird instrument, which is standard now. But back then, it was not at all. Like Korn had 7 strings, and that was edgy. But he went completely to the extreme and got a 9-string bass, which is so preposterous, so out there. And that left a big impact on the very impressionable 17-year-old me who was just starting to play bass. Like suddenly I discovered like the mechanics of Victor Wooten, like, you can do what with the bass? And then Gene Bowden with his 9-string bass. So I kind of blended this world, and I started my own quest of too many strings. I got 5-string, which was the Conklin, the same brand that Jean Baudin was using. And then I got the 7-string because they made a 7-string, the 7-string Groove Tools from Conklin. Because I was getting pretty good at two-hand tapping and, playing the instrument in a piano-like fashion. And I started adding more strings. And when I was 22, back in 2004, I was like, the hell with it. I think I can handle even more. So I ordered my first custom 9-string that I got in 2005, and that became my signature instrument since then.
It's amazing. It's amazing, and the patience that you guys probably had to have waiting for these instruments, because you order them, they build them, it takes time, they ship them. It must have been brutal to wait so long to receive this tool that you're wanting to explore, and then you get it, and then you have to sort of almost relearn the instrument or re-explore the instrument.
Yeah, pretty much. But I started playing it mentally before I got my hands physically on it, because I knew that I would have to adapt to another lower string, like the F-sharp string, not to get too technical, but we're all metalheads here. And so I was kind of adapting and trying to see my pickup with my thumb rest as the F-sharp string, so that I wouldn't have to mentally... Anyway, I had my technique down, but I ordered it in 2004 and I got it in 2005. So I was still playing the 7-string at that point. And with Unexpect, we recorded the album in a Flesh Aquarium with the 7-string, but like right after that, I got the 9-string. So I did the whole tour cycle with the 9-string after that.
What are the benefits of having more strings for people that don't know this? What is the benefit of having 5 extra strings on a bass?
Well, it's a bit much. You don't have to go to 9 necessarily. But, even back then, I mean, when you were playing a 6-string, it was like edgy. It was like for edgy metalheads and edgy like jazz player. And now everybody's playing a 6-string bass. So, it really caught up. But the extreme of 9 was just, I could see the use for a higher string on the 7-string, but I couldn't necessarily see the use for a low F-sharp. I didn't need to go that low, basically, but I was like, I don't want to get an 8-string, because it's going to sound like a 4-string double string, like Pearl Jam style, and I didn't want that confusion. I was like, I'm not going to get an 8-string and then... a month later order a 9-string, because I think I can add another one. So I just jumped and had the 9-string made, and I was like, I'll figure it out, because your body doesn't know the difference. There's nothing natural about playing the violin in this weird position, and yet it's one of the most classical instrument, pun intended. And your body's going to adapt to anything that you put it through, basically. So I knew that if I'd spend the time, I could figure out the instrument and play it. And I was 22 back then, and that mentality kind of followed me, and just like learn the instrument. Your body doesn't know the difference. We're not born to play any instrument, but we can learn all of them. So it's just, treat it as an instrument and you'll figure it out. I was super into the mechanics of the Chapman stick back then, so I kind of wanted to blend these worlds, Chapman stick and electric bass, and that's how it came about.
Were you always musically inclined, let's say, not like a prodigy, let's say, as a child, but is it something that came easy for you, learning new instruments, piano, let's say, or stuff?
No, I don't think I was musically inclined until I started playing guitar. That's really when we had these like keyboard lessons in like high school, but I never really did that much with that. I always had the keyboard, when I was a kid, but I'd never worked on chops or really anything. I was just fooling around with it. But for some reason, I guess this reason, I have giant hands. Bass really felt like right at home, and I could like manipulate it, I guess in the proper way. Also, I got some lessons just for like a couple months. But the first guy, when I got the bass, I got bass lessons, to go with it at some music store. But he really taught me to start in the proper way, the way of holding it, scales, learning some songs. So he really put me on the right path, and from there I just learned everything by myself, basically.
Amazing. I love it. The end of Unexpect was a sad moment. How long did it take you to mourn it? And it's probably never ending. You guys built something up very unique, something super interesting. There's no other band like Unexpect out there. Igor is trying, but different, because basically you're and I could be wrong. You seem to be the only still active member. So it must have been a tough moment to be mourning something that you've built so far up and then just have it be gone.
Yeah, for sure. For years it was rough, but it was kind of not denial, but we weren't sure that the band was done at first, because it was like a hiatus at first. So we never had that emotional meeting where we hug each other and we're like, that's the end, playing back in black and white and slow motion everything that you've ever lived with that band in your head. We never had that moment. I couldn't have the heart to go through that anyway. So we took a break. We had a meeting to take a break for a year and then see what happens. And after a year and a half, we kind of agreed that I guess it was the end for now. But it was the end anyway. But after that, for sure, it was rough for a couple of years. I mean, it doesn't take forever to get over, but it was rough for a couple of years because it's such a big part of who you are and your identity and your agenda, because, you're busy with shows and practice and all the stuff that goes in with being in a band, that it's really a part of you that goes away. But I tried, keeping my feet on stage with different bands and session contracts and stuff like that. But there was never after that the touring cycles and stuff like that. But I'm really glad that some people still come up to me and talk about the music that we put out 10, 15 years ago, even more. So it seems to have left an imprint. I even have a book called Mean Deviation: 4 Decades of Evolution of Music, and we're mentioned as part of the evolution of, progressive music. So
Absolutely.
It's really an honor to be recognized. I mean, still today after all these years. So, yeah.
2017, you dropped first solo EP, Communion with Vvon Dogma. Finally,
yes, sir.
You had your own voice, your own... Take me to that moment of mourning Unexpect, doing session work, playing in a Pantera cover band where I came out and played a killer track with you guys. It was super fun. Finally taking the leap and doing something solo on your own, building something after such a big band.
Yeah, well, I don't know if Unexpect was big, but, it left an imprint. But it was, after all of these years, it's something that I could not really stop doing. I always had, demos on my computer and, tracking in my home studio. And even some of that material was initially maybe going to be Unexpect material. So there's some crazier stuff on the record that I was considering putting into Unexpect for further records. So that tells you how old some of that material is. But I put out an EP. It was really initially just a demo that I had back in 2016, 2017 that I recorded with my friend Blaze, who was also in Unexpect. And it sounded pretty good, so I released it as an EP. And for all of the other songs, I wrote it with Kevin Alexander on drums back in 2018, and we hit the studio. But it's basically me with countless hours of, spending countless hours with my electric guitar and my instruments and my bass and just writing stuff and orchestrating and countless hours that did not go to waste, because finally it's a record. Because it's so easy to have unfinished demos and unfinished song. That last 5-10% of inspiration is always the hardest thing. So I was glad to finally justify all this hard work and all these countless hours spent orchestrating music and, finally make it something tangible.
The Kvlt of Glitch came out May 5th. It's interesting. I listened to it all today. Your identity is painted across it.
It's a weird record.
It's a weird record, but it's enjoyable and it feels cohesive, which is important. It feels like one project. It feels like you. You mentioned that last 5%, and it's something that I love to ask people that do basically solo projects. How do you know when it's good enough? How do you know when it's finished? A track, let's say, because in a band setting, it's like a group decision. And I read in one of your quotes that you don't have to fight for your ideas as you used to in a band project. So how do you know when a track is finished that it's good enough?
Well, believe it or not, the last master was printed, I think last week. So it's never really finished, I actually uploaded everything and I was like, nah. And then I went back to the guy in studio and I was like, okay, here's some updates that we could do. And he redid a super last minute the master. What you hear right now is the final result. But so basically it's never finished until the day it's released. But man, countless hours of going back to the studio, redoing stuff, especially for the vocoder, which is really uncharted territory, and it's not as easy to mix as a regular voice because there's a bunch of overdubs with a bunch of frequency response, and for this to sit somewhere in the mix is kind of challenging. And also the self-doubt of, like, is this worth anything? Am I just crazy? Am I going to get laughed at? Which I don't really care because I'm used to being the weirdo in any lineup.
The vocals are super interesting. I have to say that when I saw the first single drop, I watched the video and I was like, oh, this is cool. It was very interesting to see that much of your personality painted across the project and throughout the whole album. So take me to a vocoder, explain it exactly what's going on there, how that works. You write out lyrics and then you speak them in, and then you program and tell which notes each thing goes, and then there's like harmonies that get built upon that. I'm just guessing at this point.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, but which makes it even more of a headache, because if you record vocals, I mean, you sing and that's the track basically. So I need to record vocal part and then do the harmony. Well, it's all done about at the same time, but there's a MIDI file that tunes the vocals to a certain harmony. So the same vocal take can trigger different lines that have different imprint of different tones on it, different synthesizers. So just one vocal track can trigger, like, for instance, 5 different tracks, and 2 of them being bass with that line and 3 of them being on top and 1 harmonized, and they all have different tone signature, and then you mix that all down to make something cohesive basically. But the possibilities are really endless. And back in 2005 I heard a track by Imogen Heap. She was one of the first pop singer to do that, like the track Hide and Seek.
Exactly.
She kind of put the synthesizer, and it was super bare down to just her vocals and the synthesizer, and that track was amazing.
It is.
And I remember driving the van on tour with Unexpect, and I had a moment where everybody was sleeping in the van, and I had a moment as the sun was coming up, and we were super tired, and that song came on the radio, and I was like, yeah, it really sat with me as I was driving north to Edmonton or something.
I love that song.
But I was always fascinated with vocoders after that, with the modern electronic and pop production like James Blake and Bon Iver and a bunch of electro pop artists that are using that, but it's never really seen into the elitist rock and roll metal or rock mentality, because everything needs to be analog. But I've listened to more electronic music than rock music basically in the last decade, and I wanted to incorporate that into my sound. Basically do what I always did and blend the unblendable. So basically taking that synthetic approach of production, it's really synth heavy, the record and the vocoder, and put that into a modern metal outfit with the low tuning, the 9-string bass and stuff like that, and just see what happens, because it's the kind of thing that I'd like to have in my record collection. So basically it's just making the albums that you don't have in your record collection, and I was able to do that, so it's cool.
That's very cool. And you have done you've nailed that, just mixing the synthetic, the synth music with the heavy. It blends seamlessly, but it's an extremely complex thing to make happen, so congrats to you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Accomplished that, because it's a pain. I can imagine the tiresome moments trying to make the things that you love get along.
Yeah, with no frame of reference, because it's not something that exists or that I have a ton of examples to take from. So it's kind of, it's kind of being the lost astronaut in space, not knowing what's going to happen.
I like that very much. The 2 + 2 = 5 cover was a nice treat too. You mentioned Radiohead earlier, playing covers of Radiohead. Here you are taking it to a next level, providing a very interesting cover. Mixing and blending the synth and the heavy, it was amazing.
Well, that's what I always say, is that I like the bands that do covers but that really revamp them with their own style. And again, blending the unblendable, making a weird metal cover of a Radiohead song is kind of different. It wouldn't have made sense for me to cover Slayer, for instance. Like, no hate on Slayer, but to me, it was more interesting to take something from another music style and incorporate it into another sound, basically, and really revamp it. So
it fits so well.
I'm such a huge Radiohead fan, harmonically, and their structure and the way they make music is so fascinating. So it made sense in my eyes.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed it very, very much. I like to talk a lot about mental health. For the past year on the podcast, you mentioned that for the lyrics on the record, you've been feeling a lot of dark feelings your whole life, especially recently. Take me to how you cope with these dark feelings, putting them into the music. Talk to me about the darkness and how you confront it.
Yeah, well, I've done a little tour of interviews and stuff like that to promote this record, and I keep talking about that little lyric book that I have everywhere with me. So there's a lot of thought and, just writing the lyrics that went into that. And then when you write song, you just open it and try to put these blocks together. Yeah, basically just keep, when there was something dark, because I have some degree of history of depression and anxiety, and I think it's a lot of people can relate to that, just that feeling of emptiness inside, or just a unexplainable physical bluesiness that you can't really exactly pinpoint. And I was plagued with that all my life, but that helped for a good while. But now it's empty. It's empty beer. But writing lyrics and mostly keep making music was not that I'm hiding behind the bass and writing music, but it's something to focus your attention on. So I kept basically working on that like a madman, and I guess in some way it kept me sane. But there was some health problems, and I guess a lot of people can relate to that feeling of darkness inside. I just tried to make something out of it.
When you put these dark feelings into music and then you reflect upon the song, let's say now the album's coming out tomorrow, you can't change anything, let's say at this point, and I don't want to give you any ideas right now. when you re-experience those dark feelings in the song, how does that feel? Does it feel cathartic, or is it something that brings you back to that emptiness?
Well, it used to, but at this point in time, I've listened to the album way too much to, I just want it out there and not listen to it for like a year and maybe come back to it. But when it started to sound good in studio, I really felt something. But strangely enough, there's one track that's not a full band track. That's basically just a dark ambience. That is the track number 6, called Hive Mind. And that's a good representation of just a weird-ass, dark, horror, sci-fi ambience that I wanted to put on the album just as a breather. But it's like the most terrifying breather. And, I listen to a lot of ambient music and like really dark, distorted stuff like Ben Frost, or Empty Set, or Tim Hacker, just really, really dark stuff that's just ambient music, weird ambient music. If metal can be sexy and lush like Deftones, for instance, well, then ambient music can be violent and incredibly terrifying. And I find that in Ben Frost and Empty Set and, Tim Hacker. So I kind of wanted to do a little bit of that on the record as a form of an interlude or a breather. And I think that that's a good representation of something that's in my head that I want to represent on the album. It's just a feeling, just a landscape, sound landscape, basically, but it's dark as fuck. So, yeah.
I love Tim Hacker, by the way. Really, really like Tim Hacker very much.
Get into Ben Frost. Ben Frost has a record called By the Throat by Ben Frost, and it's not only one of the best ambient record, but it's one of my favorite album of any genre, and that's really saying something. It's the weirdest thing. It's ambient music, but it's performed, and it's not necessarily electronic. It's super analog, and it's terrifying. It's awesome music.
Sounds like fun. But
sounds like fun.
I love beer collabs. I'm drinking one of mine right now. If you could make a non-alcoholic beer, what would you call it? What style would you make it? And maybe we can find a brewery here in Quebec to do it.
Well, maybe I'm craving a dark beer these days to follow up on the darkness of the soul. But, a good porter or a good stout that, not, it's been done, but a good porter or a good stout that would be 0% or 0.5, whatever. I haven't tried that many. And I know Guinness just released one, but I can't find it anywhere. But that's the biggest name. But any craft beer that, make a 0% stout or porter, I'd be interested.
Very cool. Le Buckale used to do one. I'm not sure they still do it. I can't think of any more as I look to my beer expert, Steph. He's not sure either. Let's turn it over to the Thirsty Thursday gang. If anyone has any questions for Fred, raise your digital hand, and I'll call upon you, and you can shoot your question to Fred. As always, hand up first is Phil de Vitesse from the Whispers from the Void podcast. Phil, go for it. What's your question for Fred?
My question, you talked about the Vvon Dogma I album. My question is more like, what do you think about that album? What does it mean to you, that album? How can you describe it, this album?
Well, the very name Vvon Dogma I was, to me, it means the rebirth or the second incarnation of any entity. So in a very personal manner, Vvon Dogma I to me means literally my second musical identity, or a way of being freed of, having to fight for any idea and stuff like that. So it's really a kind of a rebirth, and it means a lot. I mean, it's literally the last decade of music spent in my home studio being put out for the public, basically. So it really means the world in a way that I'm able to finish this and put it out there. But at the same time, I'm aware of the musical landscape that we are in now, and the music industry and all of that, and how an album doesn't mean as much as it used to. But I really don't care. I'm just really proud of releasing that all these years after. And I know that some people are going to be confused because it's not Unexpect or it's different. But it's really a personal achievement. So I love how it sounds. It's never perfect to our ears because we're insane, right? So it's never like... The goal of the whole craft is to take it as close as you can to your initial vision, and I think I think I did that, but it's never perfect. But I already want to make a second full-length album. But now that I talk about it, it's going to be out in 11 years, right? So
11 years, 11 strings.
Exactly. Let's put more strings.
You do like Jean Baudin, and you just take 11 strings now.
Yeah. He plays an 11 string now. I was like, 9 is reasonable. 9 is like the sweet spot.
No. You do an album. You put a featuring with Jean Baudin, Felix Martin, that does like the guitar with like two.
Yeah, I know him.
It's perfect. Like you do fucking like everyone that plays like extended range guitar and bass, right. And you do an album with that.
I thought about that. Like, it's not impossible that, you see something like that. But I for my future experimentation, I went completely the other way. And I had a 1-string bass made that's sitting right next to me right now. It looks like this. So it's a bass with a slider that holds the note in place.
Wow.
And you can click and it holds that note. And then you can unclick it. And then you can slide it to wherever you want. And that's plugged in the pedal board right now. I don't know if you can see that. But so it's basically, I'm treating a 1-string bass that's tuned to E, an octave lower than a bass. And there's a pickup that's a sustainiac. So the note plays itself in a feedback. And that goes into the pedal board. So I basically... The bass is like a synthesizer trigger, so you can play it hands-free because you have the slider and you have the sustainiac looping the note, and then your hands are free to tweak the knobs and play it like a synthesizer. So I'm not going to go to 11-string, but I'll experiment with that crazy-ass 1-string bass probably on the next record. Who knows?
I need to try that.
It's a lot of fun, and... You don't really need hands. So instead of doing this and playing 7 notes at the same time, you play that one note and you kind of twist it around and play with the pitch. And there's little clips of that on my Instagram if you want to see it.
Very nice. So we got to team you up with Rob Scallion. Do some sort of
Rob Scallion. Yeah.
Find some way to team you guys up to do something interesting.
Why not? I'm down.
I think it'd be super.
Right
He could bring a shovel, but
why not?
Amazing.
It's 2023. You can do anything.
We can do whatever the hell we want.
It's just sound.
Thank you so much, Phil. As always, you rule. Phil does a bunch of stuff for the podcast. He designs a bunch of logos and images. Anything you basically see on my social media, Phil has basically designed it. So massive cheers to you, Phil. We got Pete from Hath. Hail Hath. Pete, what's your question for Fred?
Hey, Fred. Big fan. Going way back. I have a quick little story and then a question.
There you go.
So one of my favorite show memories was Unexpect played in New York at BB King's. I think it was shortly after In a Flesh Aquarium came out. You were standing right in front of me and you were doing the rock star thing, holding your bass out over the crowd.
The Steve Harris style?
Exactly. But I guess you lost your balance and you fell on me and my friend and picked you up, didn't miss a beat. And you hop back on stage. It's just one of my favorite memories from any show.
I don't recall that specifically, but I'm not surprised. But yeah. You know, coming from that at the drive-in Dillinger escape plan where sometimes your instrument is not in your hand anymore and it's fucking chaos and you go, yeah. So that's where I come from live. But go ahead with the question.
Yeah. So one thing that always stuck out to me about Unexpect and now Vvon Dogma, I also a big fan, by the way, is the aesthetic, just like the attention to detail visually, sonically. And I was just wondering if that had if there was an inspiration for where that look and that aesthetic came from.
For Vvon Dogma specifically, you know, in the last decade, I kind of became a big visual art fan, just, you know, not knowing anything about it, but just, you know, with everything that we see online and going to a few museums and just seeing art like we mentioned, like the Euronymous Bosch behind me. And I just kind of wanted to incorporate that to, let's say, the album artwork or in the video and stuff like that. But musically, I very much come from that mentality that it can't be bare. It needs to be, you know, over orchestrated with a bunch of you know, for Vvon Dogma, synthesizer, but back in Unexpect, you know, everything that could have been tried has been tried and ended up on the record. It was so dense. So I guess, yes, the maximalist mentality is very much all over these records, but I don't know that there's one inspiration or one way of thinking. It's just, I don't really know, man. It's getting bored of just like guitar, bass, and drums. Unless you're Cryptopsy, because that's the dopest fucking band in the world. But you know, we were always about, you know, more instrumentation with violin, keyboard, and female vocals and like electronic stuff. So I wanted to keep that way of thinking in a way and just like putting everything that could be in like new sounds that don't even exist in the music. And but I don't know that there's one inspiration specifically. It's just the mentality of doing sonically something more than most rock bands, basically.
Amazing. Thank you, Peter. Hail Hath. Logan, you're up next. What's your question for Fred?
Right on. Good to see you guys. Just kind of had a fucking instrument nerd out kind of question, if you're all right with that. So I was kind of wondering what you're tuning your 9-string to, as well as like your gauge of strings and your fretboard length. Also, like how you get comfortable with that like length of your neck and stuff. Because I jumped personally from a 4-string to a 6-string all within a year, and it's very difficult to jump from that, which maybe like a 3-inch neck, to like a 6.5. And so I was wondering like how you jump, like, and how comfortably you jump from this stuff and do that.
Well, from 4 to 6 is a big jump. Like it's gonna feel like another kind of instrument, literally. The way I did it was really, I played 4-string and then 5 and then 7 and then 9. So it was really incremental. But from 4 to 9, there's really a world there. But anatomically, I'm fortunate to have like big basketball player hands, but I was never good at sports. I was like, I'm gonna put too many strings on my bass instead. But for the bass, it's tuned. Well, you have the 4-string, which is tuned E, A, D, G. So I have a lower B like on a 5 string and a lower F sharp, basically. And there's 3 higher string as well. So in total, it's F sharp, B, E, A, D, G, and then a C. That would be the top string of a 6 string. But then I also have an F and a B flat. I'm looking at the bass as I'm, saying that. So it's F sharp to B flat, all fourths. And the string spacing is 16 millimeters. And it's a fan fret system. So I have 35.5 inches on the bass side and 32 inches on the treble side. So yeah, 35.5 is pretty big, but the 1-string bass has 37 because it's even lower tuned.
With it being fan fretted, does that like bring in any extra new notes that you could play on your scales that you're playing or anything?
Not new notes, but there's less disparity between the strings, and sometimes the tone of the big string is really different from the same note on the the strings below it, but it kind of manages the string tension and the feel correctly. It's the same concept that you see on a grand piano. A grand piano is going to have the tail on the lower strings, and then it comes back in with the higher strings because they don't need all that resonance. It's the same kind of concept where you have more tension and more sustain on the bass strings, and then you can still have a little bit of that guitar feel on the higher strings. So it really makes sense. When I see dingwalls with 4-string and fan fret, I'm like, you don't really need a fan fret instrument for 4 strings, but when you get to 6, 7, 9 strings, then it starts to really make sense. So,
awesome. Yeah, thanks, man.
No problem. And also the neck is really, really thin, so it's easier to wrap around.
One more question to this. What model is it? Like what company do you play for? I also wanted to know that.
For the bass?
Yeah.
Yeah, what I have right now is a Padalka bass from Simon Padalka, which was made in Russia. He's a Russian luthier, which it really exploded in social media in the last couple of years, and it's really, really awesome. But things in Russia are so he's actually moving in Canada to work for Dingwall. I don't know if we lost his lutherie forever or if he's going to keep building in Canada, but yeah, it's a really dope instrument. That's the green 9-string bass that you can see on my Instagram, the Padalka.
Rad, man. Thanks so much.
Sick. Thank you so much, Logan, for getting all technical. I like it very much. Fred, I'm going to wrap this up. I typically wrap up with a hangover cure, but that just no longer applies, so we're not going to do that. I am doing a new thing called Fight the Hops, where I ask my guests a small term goal, something that they're working on. Could be personal life, could be professional, it could be something you aspire to do within the next month or so. What are you doing right now to fight the hops?
Hey, that's a good one. We should all of that at our fingertips, going like, yes, I really want to do this, but I'm going to have to think for a minute. Yeah, what do I want to do? Start drinking again, maybe? I don't know. Probably not. Well, I mentioned earlier I had some health problem, and it's somewhat of a chronic condition that I'm still not exactly free from. So my really big focus in life is like focusing on health and well-being. And, I used to, read books about horror and Amityville books and just sci-fi stuff and UFO bullshit. And now I'm all about cleanse for healing and like how to eat well and, how to calm your mind and meditation and stuff like that. So I really went the health way, but I guess it does that naturally as you age. But my health is really my goal for the rest of 2023, yes.
I like that very much. You look good, Fred. You look like you're in a good place. Keep doing what you're doing. It's an excellent Fight the Hops. We should all be a little bit healthier. I love how you've been holding a pick throughout this whole thing. Is there going to be a live Vvon Dogma I show? Is that something you ever foresee doing? Have you done that? I assume you have, but is it something coming up? Did I miss that? What's going on with Vvon Dogma I?
Yeah, this has been a studio project forever. I want to start playing shows in 2023 for it, and I'm actually looking into some bookings, but that's the next step, basically taking it to the stage. Technically, it's going to be a nightmare. I kind of painted myself in a corner with the 9-string and the pedal board and the vocoder, but it needs to happen, and at least it's going to do something different and interesting live. But I want to do it, but it's not scheduled yet, basically.
Amazing. I am looking forward to that. I will be there if it's in Montreal. Montreal date.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
will definitely be there.
Yeah.
Big fan of what you're doing, Fred. Just keep it going. Everyone, go check out Vvon Dogma. The Cult of Glitch came out May 5th. You will not regret it. It's a unique listening experience. Thirsty Thursday gang, unmute yourselves. Give Fred the warm welcome. A send off the way that he deserves it. Massive cheers to you all for being here.
Cheers
I love
to
how
all
it
of
never
you guys.
works. Hey, thank you all so much for listening right to me. You know that I love and appreciate that. Man, do I love Thirsty Thursday hangs. Just the best. The first Thursday of each month, I hang out with a bunch of killer humans from around the globe, the Thirsty Thursday gang. I've been hanging out with these people for over 3 years now. They're wonderful humans, and I love conducting live interviews with them there with me, hanging out in the Zoom meeting with my artists. So damn stoked that I hung out with Fred finally after so many years of wanting to have him on the podcast. I'm glad that it lined up and that it happened now, finally, after 4 years of doing this. Massive cheers to Fred. Check out Vvon Dogma I's new record. You will most definitely enjoy it. It is experimental. It is interesting. It is very, very cool, and I think that you will like it, so give it a listen. Massive cheers to Fred for hanging out with me. I can't wait to hang out with you again, bud. Now, if you enjoyed this Vox and Hops episode, you should sign up to the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast's mailing list. You can do that on my website, voxandhops.com. That's VOXANDHOPS.com. And when you do that, you shall receive one email a week that will contain all of the details of everything that has happened recently in the world of the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast. You'll get to see which episodes I dropped recently. You'll get to see which episodes I have coming up. You will get to hear about any projects that I have in the works before I announce them to the public. And you will get to see which albums the Vox and Hops album review crew have reviewed recently. And you'll get to see which albums Jerry Monk, Vox and Hops' metal architect, has added to the Brutal Awakenings playlist. Trust me, if you're looking for something new to listen to, the Brutal Awakenings playlist has all of the new best music. The playlist is available on Apple Music and Spotify, so do me a favor, sign up to the mailing list, because there's always a lot of stuff going on in the world of the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast, and I hate when you miss a single thing. The Vox and Hops Metal Podcast is brought to you by Sound Talent Media and Evergreen Podcasts. I hope you have a killer weekend. I will be back next week with yet again 2 episodes, one on Tuesday and another on Friday, but until then, remember to enjoy life, metal, and craft beer. Cheers, Vox and Hops heads.